Okay. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us today. Our webinar is hosted by FinTech Calgary in collaboration with Helcim. My name is Anusha and I'm the president of FinTech Calgary, and we're so glad you guys could all join us today. For those who may not know, Helcim is a Canadian payments company built on a mission to make fair and transparent and easy to use payment solutions accessible for all businesses and sizes. In today's session, we'll be diving into Payments Demystified, exploring how businesses can streamline payments, reduce costs, or improve customer services. Our goal is to leave you with practical insights and tools you can put into action right away. Before we begin, I encourage everyone to drop your questions in the chat throughout the session so we can keep track and make sure that they're addressed during the Q&A. Thank you once again for being here, and let's get started. I'll now hand it over to Tom, Helcim's sales specialist.
Thanks, Anusha, and thanks everybody on the FinTech Calgary team. Just a thumbs up, everybody can hear me okay? Nick, I'm looking at you. I just like to call random people out. So hi, everybody. My name is Tom Edworthy. I'm part of our partnerships team here at Helcim, partnership sales specialist. Also joining me, one of my awesome colleagues, Alexis, who works with me on the partnerships team. She is our partnerships marketing specialist. So as Anusha mentioned, right, feel free to ask any questions. You can drop them in the chat. I can see them, so if I've said the right topic, I might address them like real time as you drop them. If not, we will happily do a Q&A after. And of course, if there's any questions that come up later on, you can feel free to pass them back to Anusha and she can get them over to us. You can also reach out to us at Helcim, helcim.com. There are lots of ways that you can get in touch with our team, whether it's partnerships, sales, support, or success as we go through here. So I would also want to just say thank you so much for the time. I know it's after 5 o'clock. Everybody's had a long day. And so I really appreciate you coming to listen to us. We're going to get through all this as quickly as we can, but also like providing the right information and trying to really provide some really good knowledge about really the overall of payments and sort of all the different players and the traditional providers that are out there, and then kind of slip into where Helcim fits into that market and give you some information there as well too. So any and all questions are welcome. And as Anusha said, you can drop them into the chat anytime and we'll either answer them in real time or at the end of the session. So today we're going to be talking about demystifying payments. I'm going from like confused to confident. Now, some of this information you better be aware of, and hopefully some of it is new. So I'm hoping that everybody kind of gets some learnings as we go through here. As we talk about our agenda, we're going to basically do a 101 session. So we're going to talk through like what is payments, who are all the different players that are involved when it comes to taking payments. Then we'll get into the payment landscape. So who's out there? What does the landscape look like? Where do certain different providers that are out there kind of fall, and where do they sort of align with different types of businesses or merchants? And then talk a little bit about Helcim. We're reinventing the model, a little bit different than the traditional providers, but still kind of get the best of the new age technology, but some of the best things in the old school, and then how we compare to the rest, and then give a chance for Q&A. So that's kind of our session as we go through here today. So let's get through this. Payments 101. First of all, as a business, when we talk about being able to accept payments, there is a whole bunch of different ways people can pay, right? I can still go and pay for cash. In some places, you might even trade or barter, depending on what you're doing. But for the most part nowadays, right, we all have cards in our wallets or our purses, whether it's a debit card, credit card, or gift cards, those kind of things as well too. So we'll start with like the main person as part of this purchasing or as part of the payment, which is the people here. So first of all, you've got the card holder, which is also the customer, or in this case, like all of us have been a card holder and are an existing card holder, whether you have a debit or credit card or both. So we're the ones that are coming into a business making a purchase. We present our card or digital wallet, right? If you've got your cards on your phone and stuff like that and start to tap, or maybe even on your watch, you have those abilities as well too. We are the ones that are using our money through in this case, cards to purchase items at a business, whether that's product or services. So that's a pretty easy one, right? Card holder is the person who has the card. And then we're going into the business. So in this case, the business, we use the term, and you see this in the industry as merchant. That's just sort of the standard term within the fintech industry. So businesses or the merchant are the people who are selling the goods or services, and they're the ones who accept the payments from the customers. So very 101 style, but just want to lay that base knowledge as we keep going through here. Gets a little bit more intricate here because most people are very, very clear. In fact, probably all of us went and tapped a card today. And so we know that first slide. But what happens kind of behind the scenes, right? Like who gives that card and how does that kind of money move through the system and those kind of things? So first of all, we'll talk about the issuing bank. And this is the customer's bank, the cardholder's bank, your bank as cardholders, whoever's on the call that has that. This is the financial institution that issued the credit or the debit card to the customer. So myself, I have a BMO credit card. I also have an RBC one, and I also work with, or I have a service debit card. So those are my issuing banks, and you all will have different ones. And of course, there's the traditional banks like an RBC, BMO. You might also have neobanks, so new banks that don't actually have a brick and mortar location or all online, but you can still get those cards to use, whether it's a debit card or a credit card. So that's the issuing bank, the customer's bank, the person, the company or the institution that provides you that debit card or credit card to actually pay and buy goods or services. Who is the acquiring bank? Typically a term you haven't really probably heard too much, but as you start to get into this, and if anybody's running a business, or in this case, like some clubs and stuff that want to start taking payments, the acquiring bank is your bank as the business or the merchant's bank. So this is where you have your bank account with. So if I come into your business, tap my credit card, buy $100 worth of stuff, that money that comes from my side over to your side through the payment facilitator goes into your merchant's bank or your acquiring bank. And of course, their role is to receive the funds from the customer's bank and deposit them into the merchant account. So there's two kind of banks involved. They could be the same bank, right? I can go to a business that actually uses RBC, and I'm an RBC card carrier holder, and it kind of just stays within their network. But a lot of times it also means that I have a different bank than my the business that I'm going to buy stuff with. And so it might go from one bank to a different bank as two separate institutions. All right, now that all makes sense, right? We've got people who have cards, we have people who are buying stuff, and we have people who are selling stuff, and they each have their own bank accounts, right? So it's pretty simple in that sense. The next level of how payments work is there's card networks and brands and payment processors who process this. So the card network or brands, these are the major brands like Visa, MasterCard, American Express. So when I said I have an RBC Visa card or a BMO MasterCard, it's the bank that is issuing it, BMO, but the card network is the one that actually provides that they're leveraging that particular network. So the Visa network, the MasterCard, or the American Express network. Their role is to act as a central hub and setting the rules and routing transaction data securely between the issuing and the acquiring banks. So they're basically that network that allows that transfer of money from my card, my credit card, to the merchant's bank account, and kind of facilitating that movement of money between those two. But then you also have the payment processors in there, and the payment processor is Helcim and others, as we'll talk through there. And this is the company that provides the hardware, the software, the services that allow those payments to be accepted. So the devices, the terminals, the hardware that you actually tap your card on, or your phone or your watch, that's who the payment processor is. They're the ones that actually have the ability to facilitate accepting that card payment because of the hardware that's moving that money between these networks. So the role, of course, as a payment processor or provider is to securely transmit the transaction information between the merchant and the rest of the payment ecosystem. And depending on where you're at, or you're buying things online and even from different countries and different credit cards, that network can be quite expansive. It can also be quite small, as I mentioned before. I might be going to an RBC merchant using an RBC debit card or something, and that all kind of stays within their network. So hopefully that all makes sense. And of course, if you have any questions, we can revisit this either in the Q&A, or feel free to drop those questions in there. Now, there's a cost to accepting cards. And so nowadays as a business, if you aren't able to accept a debit or credit card, whether that's in person or online, you actually are severely limiting your customer base, right? I mean, how many of us actually have cash in our pockets right now? Pretty rare. I know I've got a bunch of change in my car and stuff, but I rarely ever carry cash. And I assume it's probably the same with most of everybody on the webinar here. You've got your cards, you got your phone, you got your watch, and they all have your debit or credit card in there. So as a business, it does cost, unfortunately, it does cost to accept these debit cards and credit cards, basically giving you as the business the convenience of being able to allow your customers to pay in their preferred method. Of course, cash is there, but most people are paying in sort of these card or digital wallets nowadays. So with that, the business has to determine and have a look at what it's going to cost them to accept these cards. And there's a bunch of different models out there. And so this sort of slide kind of talks through that, and we'll get a little bit further into it as we go through. But we'll go from left to right. We've got the interchange plus pricing. And so I'll just kind of talk through this, and I'm going to make some ugly bar charts as sort of match up to the ones you see on the screen. The interchange cost, which is like the base cost of accepting a payment, is set by the major card brands. So Visa, MasterCard, American Express. And sometimes there is an additional cost in there for like a branded card. So if you had like a WestJet MasterCard, right, that gives you some of those extra rewards, that is also built into the base cost. And all those rewards you get, you might have an annual fee on your card, but most of those rewards are actually paid for by the businesses that you're buying things from through the fees that they have to pay to accept these cards. So that's kind of an interesting piece if you weren't aware of that. But how it works is, so you've got this base cost, and then there's these different models that you see here, the kind of four main models that we typically see in the industry, where basically there's an additional margin that goes on top that's added by the payment processing provider, Helcim being one. So we work on the interchange plus pricing model, which I'll talk about later. But what you can kind of see is sort of the base cost and then the margin that goes on top. And then depending on the type, there's a higher cost or a higher margin that goes up. And in far right is basically a flat rate pricing. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it basically says no matter what, it's always going to cost this amount. And in some businesses, in some cases, that actually makes a lot of sense. For a lot of other businesses, the interchange plus pricing model or some of the other ones in the middle might have a better option for them because it costs them less to accept those cards. So I'll talk about that a little bit later as we go through here, but just want to give you a preview of what those models look like. All right, payments landscape. So let's have a look at who's who kind of out there in the payments world. There's lots of different options, and we've all gone to stores or restaurants, and you might not notice the name on the terminal, but hopefully after this, you might actually pay attention to it a little bit because it's interesting. You go to different stores and you're paying through a Chase device, and then you're paying through a Square device, and it kind of varies depending on the type of business. But typically, you've got sort of kind of some main buckets here. On the micro merchants and restaurants, when I talk about micro merchants, we're talking about small locations or maybe at like farmers markets, Christmas markets, those kind of things, or people who are like doing side businesses and things like that. Square and Clover really make a lot of sense there, and I'm pretty sure we've all tapped on a Square, the little white square that you've seen maybe at a farmers market or something like that. Square is really easy to sign up. It has a great customer facing, so like us as the customers, we've got a great UI, and it's really easy to use. From a merchant standpoint, it also is a very seamless solution. It's got lots of different hardware. It does have a higher cost, right? So that's the thing. You sort of get all this stuff, but you do pay a higher cost. Square and Clover ones you see out there quite often in sort of the restaurant side of things or fast food or anywhere that's sort of like food and beverage, you see a lot of Toast and Touch Bistro. And that's because they actually have a full software that can allow you to do, like inventory management, ordering, and then manage your food and beverage sales as well. In the middle, this is your traditional small and medium business providers. So we've all kind of probably seen the Moneris, Chase, World Payments, WorldPay, First Data. These are kind of the typical ones you see at sort of some bigger merchants, like still small, medium, but also some of the larger merchants. If you go into like, for example, a Dollarama, they use Moneris. I've also seen some of the other retail stores that use Chase. And so really what they're doing is really just providing that terminal hardware. They typically don't have any software that kind of comes around with things. It's really just saying, here's a terminal, pop it in, you can accept payments. And you'll see a bit later where they are definitely a bit more legacy and old school because they're not sort of technology or focus forward on technology. But there's some benefits still to the traditional payment solutions, and we'll talk about that as well too. When you start to get to bigger enterprise and marketplace, and this is where if you had a big e-commerce store or some of these big like like Shopify and all these big sort of e-commerce providers, they will typically use big enterprise and market providers like Stripe, Aiden, or Checkout.com. So you typically don't see those with any like hardware, like it's I don't think I've ever seen a Stripe hardware in a store. They're pretty much designed for just enterprise or marketplaces. And Stripe allows you to sort of do money transfers and things like that, but it's not typically for like tap to card payments. It's usually online. They are very big, huge amount of merchants that come in there. But some of the downside there, even though they have like some new technology for e-commerce, we see this all the time. They typically have issues with customer service because small businesses who use Stripe and like for their website, maybe have 2 or 3 people that work for them. They definitely don't get they don't get the same attention as somebody who's got 500 employees or 1,000 or 10,000 employees. They really care more about the bigger accounts and kind of leave the smaller ones to sort of fend for themselves. So that's kind of what we see there. But that's where you see Stripe is kind of typically in that marketplace side. And then we also just sort of hitting the 2 bottom buckets, like D2C, direct to consumer e-commerce. You got your Shopify and BigCommerce. They will sometimes white label like Stripe or others out there. But again, typically you mostly see that as online. There is some of them that are coming out with like their own like hardware and things like that. So for example, one that we should have put in here is like GoDaddy. They allow you to do an e-commerce store, but you can then also now buy terminals from them. So some of them are sort of moving back into sort of the brick and mortar side, as well as providing the e-commerce side as well too. And then on the business to business or international, that's where you start to see things like PayPal and Wise. PayPal, of course, is very common name. We've all known that. Some of us, might even use PayPal to buy some things online. But a lot of times, and really where PayPal really came into effect, is moving money from one company to another in different countries, and doing it for a fairly decent rate. You don't see PayPal terminals, and it's really kind of rare to see PayPal as the only option when you buy things online. A lot of times you have the option to use PayPal if you have that account, but typically most people are paying with credit cards online. So that's sort of the idea of the overall landscape. And of course, if you have any questions, we can talk through that as well. But let's talk a little bit about some of these legacy providers. And these are the ones that you see most businesses kind of look at. And a lot of times, being part of an association or even like the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, they have an agreement with Chase as an example, which I find is interesting. It is a Canadian institution, but Chase is a US company. And so that's always an interesting thing for me. But what's some of the reasons why people look at legacy providers and what's the value there? So, and this is sort of a pros and cons list. So typically with the traditional providers, you have a huge amount of paperwork. You've got to submit all this stuff. You've got to put it in. It takes like at least a week, sometimes more, to get approved, because they kind of do it as an old school way. To be fair to them though, they typically do have some fair processing rates. So because they're very big and they can kind of do all this, have a lot of merchants, they can provide some fair processing rates. They are big because they typically have poor customer service, especially for small and medium businesses. And kind of like I was mentioning previously, they really care about the big guys. They make them a lot of money as they go through, and the smaller accounts are sort of like, yeah, they're there, maybe they can go self-help and things like that, but they don't really tend to spend a lot of time on them because they focus on the bigger accounts. And then of course, because they're a bit old school, they have kind of clunky technology and hardware. We've all gone to stores where that debit terminal is pretty ratty. It's, looks like it's been dropped a million times, and they're not really sleek or anything like that. They're functional, don't get me wrong, but for the price you pay compared to like some of the new versions, not just us, but some of the other options out there, you can get much better devices that are a lot sleeker and cooler looking and have more functionality compared to what we see with these traditional providers. So out of all this, to be fair, they do have good processing rates. They take a long time to apply for, typically not very good customer service, and they're definitely not technology forward facing as some of the new age technologies are out there. When we talk about the modern payment providers, so this is the Stripe, the Square, the Clovers, the Toast. So they have very easy online applications, right? You can kind of get signed up very quickly, and this is kind of the same as Helcim, as I'll talk about. But they usually have subscription fees or add-on services. So because they're also providing a bunch of extra pieces, like maybe a point of sale, or you're buying some hardware and it's fancy hardware, you add these extra modules on top of it, you typically start to add more costs, right? So as you add these services and things, they tend to be more and more costly. They also typically have a higher processing fee. A lot of them work on the flat rate price, which again sounds good, and I'll talk about that shortly. But typically they cost you more per month to use, and they have a higher processing fee that comes along with it. That said, they are known to be very user-friendly and modern, right? They're easy for people to set up. The square is super easy. Everybody knows what that is. You see it, you just tap on it because you know how it works. That connects to your phone and it makes the merchant's life really easy. And I think their thought is, hey, we're providing all this convenience, it's okay for you to pay more for it. And so that was always the case. Maybe some people are okay with that. But this is where sort of like reinventing this model and kind of taking the best of both worlds. What's good about the legacy providers and the best of the modern payment providers is where we at Helcim are sort of reinventing the model. And so Helcim, as Anusha said, we are Calgary-based. We're about 150 employees. We are all located in Calgary or surrounding area. We do have an office in Seattle. Nobody works there. It's really just for our compliance to work in the US. So we work all across Canada and the US, all provinces here, all 50 states in the US, not the territories in the US. And we're active with something like 12 to 14,000 active merchants at any given point. And our tagline really is to be the world's most loved payment company. And we are planning to do that, and we have been pursuing that by kind of taking the best of the old school and all the best of the new school and putting it together with a really unique value proposition. So we are a payments company. We help you accept debit, credit cards, and we also do ACH payments. ACH, if you're not aware of that, think of it as like an EFT, electronic fund transfer. You can think of that if I email you money, that is an EFT as well too. But really what an ACH is a direct debit out of your account. So you'll see this a lot if you have a gym membership or a personal trainer or something like that, and you've signed up for a year or something like that. A lot of times what you end up doing is having that money come right out of your bank account. Some people put it onto a credit card, but we have that ability to sort of provide credit, debit, and ACH. Some of the things with Helcim, three big pieces for us: transparency and honesty. So on our website, we're very transparent about our pricing, and I'll talk about what that model looks like. It's the Interchange Plus. We're very much a technology first approach, and we really care about everybody, small or large, really great customer service with real people here in Calgary. Some of the other things about Helcim, we have no contracts. There's no setup fees. There's no minimum amounts. So we think about, and I think there's some folks from different UFC clubs thinking about how you're going to take payments for maybe some of your events or things that you're doing. A couple things why Helcim might be a really good option there is, again, it doesn't cost you to sign up. If you don't take any payments for the first couple months, but you're doing it later on in the year, that's cool. There's no cost per every month or any subscription costs. We actually have a lot of seasonal folks who do landscaping. So they'll work for 6 or 8 months out of the year and then they don't bill. They just come back and turn on Helcim, and there's no extra cost or anything like that. So we're, again, trying to be the really, really friendly company. And I'm happy to answering those questions as we go through here. Now, Helcim works on the Interchange Plus pricing, so on the far left. But I just want to quickly talk about flat rate pricing. So if you're a business or a club or something like that, and let's say everything you're selling is worth $100, just to make it easy for math. And if your flat rate pricing is 3%, in a lot of cases, that feels good, right? I know exactly what it's going to cost me every single time I take a card. But if we think about it from a money standpoint, I come into your business, I buy $100 worth of croissants, okay? And I leave, took me, I tapped my card, it was tapped for 2 seconds and I'm out the door. It costs you 3%. You think of that as a $100 bill, that costs you $3 for me to tap that card for 2 seconds and leave for you to accept that payment. So now you're left with $97 over the 100 minus your costs and things like that. So you can kind of see how that flat rate sounds good. And in some businesses it makes sense, but it can really eat into that margin and that revenue. Can't get away from the costs really, and we do have the ability to pass fees along, and I'll talk about that in the Q&A session. But how Helcim works is, instead of adding all this extra margin on top of that interchange model and making all this extra revenue, we add a very small amount of margin, which we publish, and we actually do decreasing margins as our merchants do more business. And our goal is really saying, hey, we'll make a little bit, and the goal is that we can have the business save more money and retain more from each transaction, which helps them foster their business, do more marketing, maybe get busier. And in the long run, like very transparently, our goal is to gain a whole bunch of merchants, make a little bit off each one, and allow all those merchants to have a better cost-saving ability or cost-saving process to accept payments. So it's a win-win across the board. So that's really the goal here with Helcim and why we do that Interchange Plus pricing model. And I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more as we get into the Q&A. So a couple things, again, no monthly fees, it's all inclusive, there's no contracts. We have this fee saver. Maybe I'll just talk about that now. The idea is that you can actually pass the credit card fee on to the card holder. And I think we've all been in places or paid different things, even if, especially if you do like any donations, a lot of times the donation platform will ask if you want to cover the cost of that credit card transaction to sort of help them with their bottom line. So we have a built-in fee saver, which means that businesses can actually pass that savings on to the card holder from a credit card standpoint. If it's online, you can still do it, but the card holder would have the option to pay through ACH if they don't want to pay those credit card fees. So what I'm really trying to say is that there is a potential chance that you can utilize this and actually not pay any fees when it comes to credit card, because you can pass those on to your customers. When you work with Helcim and purchase any of the terminal equipment and hardware, which I'll talk about in a second, you own it. There's no monthly costs or subscription to use that particular equipment. We offer switching support, referral programs. There's compliance pieces that are built in so that you can make sure that you're compliant within the PCI scope and landscape, which is really the regulatory sort of process around how you store credit cards and making sure that it's all safe from a personal information and trying to reduce the amount of hacks and things like that. And we also offer some integrations, which I'll also bring up in the Q&A session as well too. So with Helcim, we are technology first. Obviously, we have an app, so you can download our app on your phone, on your tablet, on your PC. So it's available everywhere. It's cloud-based, which means that you have multiple ways to access it. And then to take payments online, it's pretty easy, right? I can send out invoices. I can send a link. You can enter your credit card online and take those payments in a safe, reliable, convenient way. But if you're taking payments in person, we have different hardware. So our smart terminal and our card reader, different pricing models. But the idea is that you can use those to accept payments in person. So you're aware, in-person payments are much lower cost because you have the card there present with a chip or like the PIN is in there and all that kind of stuff. The rates for accepting that is much, much less than online. Online, the rates are higher because there's a higher chance of risk, fraud, stolen credit cards, dark web, all that kind of stuff. So my recommendation is in any business, if it's possible, to take payments in person. Try to find a way to do that. It's definitely going to give you the best kind of lowest rates. If you have to do it online, we still offer really great rates at Helcim compared to others. But if you have a way to sort of take things in person, and I'm just thinking sort of like the clubs, take it online if you have to, but if there's a way you can take it in person, it definitely will save even additional more money there. Another thing that's happened with Helcim, which is really nice, is when people sign up with Helcim, it's not just the ability to take payments, whether it's in person or online, but Helcim also provides a suite of online tools, so payment tools. So including a virtual terminal, which means I can, Anusha, you could call me with your credit card, I can take that payment online. We also offer recurring payments so that you can automatically create invoices and automatically bill somebody instead of going in and creating these invoices. We have a full invoicing suite that you can modify and add logos and add all sorts of detail, and all these are free to use. There are no additional cost. We include them in our portal because we know that small and medium businesses need to leverage a lot of these tools. And traditionally, you'd have to go purchase QuickBooks and get this other software and these other pieces and kind of try and figure out how that all combines. What Helcim decided to do was say, you know what, let's include all these tools. We'll make it really simple and free for people to use. Maybe they don't use it all. Maybe you don't use invoicing, but you use the virtual terminal. Maybe you use all the components. They're all there, and sort of the ability to give all small and medium businesses the chance to use these tools at low cost or no cost and allow them to foster their business and grow. And they might eventually outgrow some of these tools and need a Shopify or something like that. But if our goal is sort of saying, let's provide these tools so small and medium businesses can kind of get to that level where they might outgrow us, but still use Helcim from a payment standpoint. So there's a lot more in there, payment pages, an e-store, you can set up products and services, a point of sale system included in there as well too. So if you have any questions on that or want to see a demo, our team is ready to chat with you. We can go through that as well too. Finally, and we sort of talk about this as one of our main three pillars, right? We've got our transparent pricing, we've got our technology first, and then the last piece for us is really about human customer support. So we don't do any AI chatbots or anything like that. We actually have real people in Calgary who answer the phone, and of course, answer the phone for anybody in Canada or the US. And so you can kind of see we have really high ratings, 4.4, 4.2. But what you'll see in those ratings is people will talk about the pricing, which is really good from a business standpoint. But a lot of times people will come back and say, it wasn't just this. It was like, we're so friendly. These are the type of people we want to work with. And to be very transparent as part of our pillars, because we don't have any contracts, people can sign up with Helcim and leave at any point. We include all these tools. We're really focused on customer service because we want people to stay with us because they want to, not because they're legally obligated to with a contract. And that's part of the reason why we don't have the contract, but we focus on these main pillars there as well too. So quickly, and we don't have to go through all this math here, but how does Helcim compare to the rest? We've got our interchange plus model, and then you see sort of the flat rates that you see with others. And this is actually a really good example of where that in-person makes sense. So online, you see the pricing is a little bit, across the board higher. Helcim has a lower rate because of our interchange rate. Stripe, Square, and Clover are around that 2.9 to 3.5%. So again, think of that when you buy something online for $100 and somebody's using Stripe, it's basically costing them $3 for you to enter your credit card and take that. It's definitely a little bit cheaper with Helcim online. In person, that's where you start to see some really good savings, right? So if you're able to take those payments in person, at the Interchange Plus, you're a lot lower. It's 1.76%. With the others, you're still at a lower flat rate, but it's still higher than that. So in this case, at a $100 invoice, it's $1.76 to do it through us, but with the rest, it's at least $2.30, even up to over $3 to accept that card, even in person. As I mentioned, Helcim also does the ACH, which is a direct debit. Our rates are pretty good there, and some of the others don't even offer that solution as well too. So depending on the type of business and how you're doing things, you want to really make sure you're looking at the landscape and understanding, does this company offer the different types of payments I want to offer my clients, and how much does it cost, right? So those are the due diligence pieces you want to look at as you're looking around. I will say, of course, we're talking about Helcim and how great we are and all these things. There's places where Helcim is not a good choice. If you are a small micro merchant and your average transaction is $5, $10, $15, right? You're selling bracelets or something like that, or your small coffee shop or something like that. A flat rate is much better. I would always recommend that. Look at a Square, look at a Clover. As soon as your transactions start to hit sort of that $20, $25 or more mark, the Interchange Plus model really starts to be impactful. So, again, as part of our pillar of honesty, if you're selling small amounts of things, you might want to look at Square because that might actually be a better choice than the Helcim side of things. Helcim, of course, and we'll send this out, and Anusha can kind of follow up with this as well too. But there's different tools that we provide and different tools that others provide. We basically don't charge for any of our additional tools. We do charge for our terminal. You see others, of course, sell those terminals as well too. But depending on the different type of monthly add-ons or modules you have, there's additional costs. So again, more from a overview of thinking, if you're looking at payment providers as an option, make sure you have a look at what the pricing is, what any additional monthly hidden costs are, because those are the things that really can eat into that bottom line that you might not be aware of. You also want to look at those deposit times. Typically, it's about the same, right? Everybody's about 1 to 2 business days. Some will deposit faster for a higher fee. So if you really need it faster, you can pay more. Helcim is just introducing, we did this in the US and it's rolling up into Canada here soon, where any credit cards will deposit the next day at no additional cost. So today it's 1 to 2 days. Hopefully closer to end of year or start of next year will actually be into the next day automatically, and there won't be any additional costs for that. So I know it's a lot of information, especially kind of a little bit heavy at the end there with a lot of more intricate kind of pieces. But hopefully that kind of helped to make sense. I know we're actually, hey, it's already 36 minutes in, so I thought I was going to take a little bit shorter than that. So let's get into the Q&A. I've got some questions that we typically see, and so if there's anybody who doesn't have any questions, I can kind of fill in some gaps. But let's just check. I don't know if there's actually, I've been looking at the screen, so I don't know, Anusha and Eamon, was there any questions that came in?
No, I didn't see any questions in the chat.
Hey, that's okay.
Yeah.
It looks like Asna, you have a question. You have your hand raised, so please go ahead.
Hi, yes. I had a question from a more customer-centric standpoint.
Sure.
So you mentioned companies like Square that kind of pay for convenience and whatnot. How do you see that, or what do you understand about the trade-off between paying for convenience and then also affordability? And then do you also consider the bigger opportunities for companies to have value from that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, and it is kind of the new way in a lot of different tech, not just in payment, right? You have this convenience, it saves me time. I don't have to hook all these different pieces together, but I'm going to pay for that, right? A little bit more than typical. And so this is why you see a lot of folks who start, side hustles, small businesses that are trying to grow, over the weekend and those kind of things. Square is a great choice. You get really good technology. The user interface is really nice. It's easy to set up. It kind of comes out of the box, right? Because of that, it's so easy to set up, you do pay that higher cost. So, it's one of those trade-offs where you really have to look, especially in there's all sorts of things you look at when you start a business. What are my costs? How much margin do I need? How much do I need to make to be viable? And those kind of pieces of how you take those payments, and not just payments, but it might be other software or equipment that you have to buy for the business that you're working on. You have to really take that into account and say, am I getting the value that I need? It's going to saving me time for this potentially extra cost. And in a lot of ways, you can make that work, right? It really comes down to adjusting your margins, things like that. And this is why we say, especially for micro merchants and people who are doing smaller amounts, Helcim can be there. We might be able to save some money and do some good things. But Square might actually be the better choice because you don't have to worry about too much. You've got the point of sale system. It's really easy to set up. You're going to pay more, but that might actually make sense, right? So that, I guess, hopefully that kind of helps to answer the question, is that it's going to have to be case by case. I would really look at all those aspects that come along with it and the convenience and the time saving you would have there. And then does that have the trade-off for the extra cost? And then even in that sort of segment, you've got like the Clovers and the Square and sort of that in that piece. They each have different levels of costs and things like that too, right? And they will always try and add, tell you need more things, just like everybody, right? You buy a car, oh, you should get, the extra wheels, and they will always try to upsell you. So that would be my advice too, is like, focus on what you need, do your research ahead of time. A lot of times you can find calculators, like we have a calculator on our website. I think they also as well do too. So if you kind of had a sense of how much you expect to take in on an average transaction, how much per month, you can kind of do some pre-calculation work to look at that. And to be fair, we do this, but others will do this too. You can also say, here's what I expect, and kind of get a statement comparison done. So you can actually have that directly from the companies, and Helcim, we do this, and Square does this as well, and says, here's what I think, here's what I'm going to do, or how much I have with my existing provider. If I switched over to Square, how much would I save? How much would it cost me more? And then you can make those comparisons, right? So, so does that help to answer your question, Asna, I hope?
Yes, it does. It also reinforces like the fact that you guys don't have a contract, so it's actually really good because sometimes you can do all these pre-calculations and then it can end up being so different. So
yeah,
that's really
and
helpful
sometimes
for
that happens.
SMEs.
We actually, an interesting stat with Helcim, 75% of our merchants didn't start with Helcim. They went to Square, they went to Stripe, they went to all these one names that I mentioned on there before, and something happened, right? They had bad customer service, they had a good rate, but then there was a hidden fee that they weren't aware of, and now they're, it's gouging into their margin. Or they had a good rate, but then that rate starts to creep up. And sometimes they don't even tell you, right? You just find out when you're like, wow, I did the same amount of sales as I did last month, but it cost me $15, now $100 more. So sometimes it's the straw that breaks the camel's back that then they kind of try to find us. So yeah, only about 25% start with Helcim and stick. About 75% have got annoyed with somebody else, in our case, thankfully, and then found Helcim, and they stick because of those reasons, right? The open transparency, honesty, the contract, the lack of contract. The other thing I'll mention too is, you might have a business that has, bigger sale items and smaller sale items. There's nothing stopping you from actually having Square and Helcim, or Helcim and something else, right? Where you can decide to use Helcim for the transactions that make sense, and Square for the transactions that make sense. Maybe it's an online versus in-person kind of concept too. It does mean you're setting up more things and signing up, like potentially the contract with Square and not with Helcim. But that's also an option too. It's not illegal to have two
Right.
choices, right? You can have more than one tool in your toolkit. So that is something else you might want to consider, and anybody should, considering what their business is and where they take their payments in person or online, and the types of transactions they're doing. So thank you for the questions. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions that anybody has? You can just unmute and ask, or feel free to raise your hand. I'm just kind of slipping through to see if anybody else has their hands up. Oh, Nicholas, there we go. I was hoping you were going to ask a question, man. Go ahead.
Hey, Tom.
Hey.
Yeah, I just had a question regarding. I was surprised to see Chase Bank there.
Yeah.
Why did these legacy providers have such a foothold in Canada, especially a bank like Chase, which is American?
Great question. I've actually thought the same thing, and I kind of mentioned that with the connection with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. They have a direct relationship with Chase. Typically, what it was back in the day, and well, I'm obviously much older than most everybody on the call. Back in the day, you kind of had three choices, right? You sort of had like the Moneris, which Moneris is an interesting piece. It's actually like kind of a love child between two Canadian banks. For some reason, I think it's RBC and BMO maybe. But like that was two competing banks that kind of created Moneris so that they could actually compete against Chase and these other ones. So back in the day, you really didn't have a lot of choices. A lot of times you might think you had choices, but it was people who were reselling Chase. And so you think you were buying it from this company like, Nicholas's, merchant services. But what you were actually doing was saying, hey, I'm coming and I'm talking to you and I'm meeting you face to face because there's no Chase salespeople in Canada, let's say. But then when the equipment came, it was actually Chase because you were sort of piggybacking on top of it and kind of doing what they call ISOs, independent selling organization, or resellers. And so nowadays, there's a huge amount of these resellers out there. There's a lot of different options, but most of the businesses, a lot of them really were stuck with the legacy because sometimes it was also the brand awareness, right? It's kind of like when we go to the store, right? You buy this type of bread, you buy this type of peanut butter, you have that brand awareness because you know it. We've seen Chase, not as much, but you see Moneris really a lot in Canada. And so a lot of people will start a business and say, all right, well, if I'm going to take payments, the last machine I saw was Moneris. That's the one that I've seen so many people use. It must be good. And so they kind of have this like this brand hold and the market share based on sort of the traditional being kind of very few options. Nowadays, and especially really, I would say in like the last 5 years, you start to see a lot more Squares, the Clovers, the ones in Helcim who are sort of breaking into that market and kind of saying, hey, small and medium businesses, you don't have to go to the legacy providers anymore. I mean, you still can, but you're missing out on some of these new age technologies. And of course, some will say, yeah, that's great, but I don't want to pay the subscription fees. I'll go back to the old one. But that's typically it, really, Nicholas. And from how I would answer that is that the old school way, there was very few choices. And because it was so widespread and people saw it, it kind of had this confidence level that I should just pick Moneris because that's what all the other business I say use, which also has a bit of hesitation nowadays too, because if you're especially an older person starting a business and you kind of have that Moneris in your head, it might be hard to think about using a Square or Helcim because you don't see it as much, right? And is there something I'm not aware of, right? Those kind of things where it's like, hey, Dollarama uses Moneris, they're doing well, I should just use it, right? But you do miss out on a lot of things when it comes to using those traditional providers. Outside of, they will sometimes give some pretty decent rates, but when you call in, you're on the phone for 4 or 5 hours. So those are the kind of things. But that's what I would say is they're been around so long that they just basically built up that market share. And now they're starting to lose it a little bit. And you see them starting to try and be innovative, but they don't move as fast as, the Squares, the Helcims, and some of the other new age kind of payment providers out there. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. It makes total sense. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for the question. I appreciate it too. All right. And then I think I saw Hyder. How you doing? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm doing well. Firstly, thank you so much for the webinar and all the insights into, what else Helcim offers. It's pretty cool that we have like a Calgary local-based company that's, at the forefront of this. And so, we're looking forward to seeing what you guys can come up with in terms of technology first as well, right? Now I'm curious from like a business perspective or like a business signing on. So obviously I know you were talking about looking at Square being some options for university level clubs because maybe those are smaller types of transactions. But when looking at it from a business perspective, can Helcim like be embedded within like a ticketing platform that already exists or like a website? Is it through APIs? How flexible are those APIs?
Perfect. I was waiting for somebody to ask because if nobody wasn't, I was going to bring this up. So I really appreciate Did I say your name right? Is it Hyder?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Okay, Hyder, thank you so much. So yeah, no, Helcim actually has a full suite of APIs. They're not hidden. They're actually available on our website. Again, transparent. There's kind of two ways that you can think of the API and integration. So if, let's just take the club example, okay? But this could also be any kind of business. You spin up a website. I might go and purchase my membership or an event ticket or something through there. Helcim actually has all the APIs. We have tier 2 support and free sandboxes where you can actually do integration of Helcim into the website. And at a high level, basically what happens through APIs and webhooks, an iframe can pop up, which means that I can go to the club website, select that I want to buy membership, whatever it might be. And then, say I want to pay now. Basically, the Helcim piece kind of slips into your website. It's all done through the Helcim side of things. So like from a compliance standpoint, you're not storing any credit cards. It's none of that information is kind of going through your website. It's sort of just pieced through our piece into your website. And that's an easy integration to do. It doesn't cost anything outside of some development time and resources, but we have all the documentation and support that can help you do that. So it's a really great way to do it into like a website. Now, if you have a ticketing system that you've purchased, right, or you're subscribed to, we do have some integration partners, and we can send Anusha the link that she can send out after. We actually just recently are announcing one called simplybook.me, and another Canadian one, which is really cool. They actually came to our office this week, called Bookie, which is basically a booking system. It allows you to sort of manage appointments, and in this case, a lot of it's sort of designed for salons, but it can be transferred to other different types of businesses. So we do have some direct integrations, and we're always working on them. We have so many people inbound asking us to do this on brand new platforms or existing platforms, and so we have to pick and choose where we spend our resources to do that. If you have a software that we aren't directly integrated in, it doesn't mean that you can't still use Helcim. And I'll just sort of explain this in multiple different ways. So a prime example of one that we see a lot, especially in the medical space, and I know that's not kind of where you're looking at, but just to give you an example, and it's another great Canadian company. They're called Jane App. So if anybody hasn't heard of it, and they're pretty cool, they're out of Vancouver. You typically see that at massage therapy, chiropractors, like they use Jane App to sort of manage the client medical charts and appointments and those kind of things. We're not integrated with Jane App. We're working on it, but we're not there yet. So what we talk to people who call us and say, well, I use Jane, but I want to kind of leverage the Helcim pricing, because if you do the processing through Jane App, you're going to be at that 3.5%, right? Because they make some extra revenue there. So what we say is keep using Jane App. Everything, like maybe still use your booking system, right? You can keep doing that whole system there. When comes time to take a payment, you have your invoicing or your booking set up there, and then you just go over to Helcim. So you switch over to our platform, you send that payment link out, you take that payment, finish that off. Once you know the payment's done, you then go back and do a manual reconciliation. So Hyder, what it does do is kind of add an extra manual step, right? In some cases that doesn't make sense. Most of the people you talk to, it's like, well, I'm going to save enough that taking an extra 1 minute here to sort of switch between platforms and reconcile makes sense for me. And so that's how we sort of talk about it, where you can sort of manually integrate by adding this extra step if we're not directly integrated. But that said, we also do have we've had lots of folks who use Zapier and other kind of connector applications that can use our API, create sort of a middleware kind of connector. And if the other software you have has some open APIs, even if we don't have a direct integration, you can kind of do your own in the background as well too. So if you have the skills to do it, you can go a little bit like farther, or you can do the quick manual process, or ideally, and our list is growing, that we have a partner that we work with already that has Helcim integrated in there. So lots of different ways, and hopefully that helped answer your question there, Hyder.
No, it absolutely did, and I love the flexibility. As a follow-up, if you don't mind, I'm curious, what type of onboarding support do companies get when signing up, especially because I know the model that Helcim has doesn't have contractual obligations, and so I'd be curious to what their approach is on there.
And it kind of falls in line with us trying to be very friendly and knowing we don't have the contractual obligation to be like, hey, you signed up, whatever, we don't care about you, you're stuck with us for 3 years, right? We don't think that, we don't have that mandate or mantra. So we have a full customer support team, we have a client success team, and then we have a plethora of documentation and a whole bunch of videos. So really we have some wizards that come on board as well too. So once you sign up with Helcim, first of all, signing up with Helcim is really simple. It's about 6 steps. If you have all the information, it takes like 5 or 10 minutes. So it's very quick. About 80% of our merchants are auto approved in the same day. So that works well. Just in that line, I'll just make a quick note. There is certain companies and businesses we can't work with. So even though we're in Canada, right, we can't actually operate with any cannabis companies or retailers. We can't do like firearms, adult entertainment. You guys are picking up what I'm putting down, firearms, those kind of things, right? So there's certain businesses that are a bit too risky for us to deal with. But the majority of ones that come in with good credit and no history of fraud and stuff, they're pretty much basically approved same day. Once you're approved, You have access to the dashboard. We have wizards that walk you through it. We also have a team that people can call and ask for help. And you can call and sort of book an onboarding session. So if you said, hey, I really want some help setting up, how do I do invoicing for my particular business that might have some uniqueness to it? It doesn't cost, right? We don't charge for that. We want to make it easy for you, help you get set up at the start so you can hit the ground running. So between real live people or our our documentation and our videos, there's a whole bunch of different options depending on how you want to be onboarded, whether it's directly or on a self-serve basis. And all of that's available on our website, and you can actually go look. We have a new marketing individual we hired, Victor, and he's done some fantastic walkthrough videos, in a new age kind of TikTok-y style that really I think is very effective and helps people learn stuff very quickly in sort of the new age style, almost like an infographic, but the TikTok style, short videos that give you the answer you need and you can move on. So all those different methods, Hyder.
Love to hear it. Thanks for that, Tom.
Yeah, and feel free to check them out. They're all available online. You don't have to be a merchant to go and have a look at sort of how that all comes together.
Will do.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think actually that kind of covered. I was sort of had some questions I was going to hold in my back pocket. The big one was integration, so I really appreciate that question there. We're almost right at time, and I know everybody's probably getting hungry for dinner and stuff. So we can open up if there's any other questions anybody has. Feel free to shoot them out now. And if not, I will turn it over. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to try this one. Usharab, please say I pronounced that okay.
Yeah, that was good.
Hey, perfect.
Hi. Thank you for the webinar. Very informative. Just a quick question. I know a lot of us are here from student clubs, or have been in the past. So, for example, I was part of a club that has previously been partnered with Square, and they have I think four of these POS terminals. Yeah. So switching to Helcim, I'm thinking that would cost them about $1,800 something to get those Helcim POS terminals to replace the Square one. So what kind of support do you think or Helcim would provide in terms of that to kind of incentivize their switch to Helcim from Square?
Migration over. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked it because we actually have built programs for helping people switch over. So I kind of mentioned this before when Hasna was asking this, but one of the first steps is let's do a saving comparison, right? Before you even switch over, let's see, is there savings that can be made with Helcim? So we'll look at the statement that you had with Square or another provider. It takes us a couple of days and we'll run through that and say, if you were with Helcim last month or the months that you were taking, your highest months of billing, what would it have cost? And so we can look at those savings. Most of the time, businesses save about 25% with switch over. Once they see their savings, we have a contract buyout program. So we can't really do much on recouping costs on the hardware they've already purchased. But if they have a contract that says, hey, you're stuck with us for the next 4 years, it's going to cost you $480 to kind of cancel this, we will offer up to $500 in credits on our side that will apply to the new Helcim account to help wash out what those contract cancellation costs would be. So pretty simple. All we need to have is documentation of what the cancellation would be. Anywhere up to $500. Once you switch over, we'll apply that to the account and kind of help that piece. There's one last piece that I think is really important that not a lot of people think about, but it's really quite critical, especially if you're doing a lot of online and you have a bunch of customer data. So Usharab, you might have my contact information, my credit card stored securely in a vault. But then when you switch over to Helcim, you're like, I don't really want to ask Tom for his credit card and Eamon for her credit card again and kind of get that customer information. We can actually, on behalf of the merchant or on behalf of our merchants, we can reach out to Square or other providers and actually have that customer information that you own on the Square side transferred over and uploaded into the Helcim side in a secure encrypted fashion. So those are the kind of three things we help to incentivize. Let's check that their savings. We'll help you get rid of a contract up to $500, and we'll also move your data that you have over there from the other side. From a terminal standpoint, we have pretty low cost terminal. It's very simple. And then our higher cost one, which really isn't that bad. I want to say, what is it, Alexis? $429, I think, Canadian. We also offer a payment program. So like you don't have to buy it all up front. You can pay for it over 12 months. We don't make any interest on it. And at the end of purchasing it, you own it. There's no extra monthly cost to like the privilege of using that. So, so in that case with the one club, you know, if they've had that big investment in there, it would make sense, I think, to look at a comparison and see what the contract cancellation would be. With the savings and the buyout program, it might make sense to switch. In some cases, the investment might already be there enough that it's not worth switching over. But we'd love to sort of give you, we'd love to sort of do that for the club to give you a sense of what it would look like with Helcim. At least we can give you information that would help make that decision. So hopefully that helps to answer your question.
Tom, if you're thinking of buying any hardware, we are having a new generation of like a starter type terminal coming out early next year. So maybe just something to think about if you are thinking of switching to Helcim. Keep an eye out for that because that's coming soon.
Yeah. Another thing that we're working on, and it's, you know, we start in this, we always go sort of south to north. We are going to bring this to Canada as soon as we can kind of jump through the regulatory hoops. But in the US, we actually also offer a tap to pay on iPhone. So in a lot of cases, you actually don't need to buy the hardware from us. You actually have it in your pocket. You do a couple of setting changes. But the idea is I could create an invoice for David, and I could turn my phone over, and he can tap his card, and I can accept that through my iPhone in the US. It does cost an extra 10 cents to accept that tap in sort of lieu of having to pay for the hardware. And we're eventually going to get that onto Android, and then in Canada, both Android and Apple. It's just, there's a bit more regulatory jump throughs to do that in Canada, but that'll be a great option down the road, Ushrab, because then you don't actually have to buy any terminal. Once you're approved, you actually have it in your pocket, and you can just start taking payments that way. And it could even be an old iPhone that you have in the desk drawer, right, that nobody's using anymore. So does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Yeah, the phone, converting your phone to a terminal idea. I think I've seen a couple of businesses and people do that, but yeah, oftentimes it's a bit hard for people to kind of trust that because, you know,
it is a bit odd, right? It's like I'm tapping my really, you know, high, like however much money is on my card here on your phone. So, you know, sometimes people do feel a bit more secure with an actual terminal because they're used to that. But I will say, and this is not just for you, Shrub, but anybody else, if you are interested in looking at those comparison programs or the contract buyout, we have a tool you can actually just upload online. So you don't even have to talk to anybody. You can actually just upload those statements. But if you wanted to, you can also email them to our sales team, and our team will do a comprehensive comparison and then reach back out over email. So there's lots of different ways to kind of get those assessments done. Okay, awesome. All right, well, hey, I didn't think we were going to take the full hour, so I appreciate everybody staying around. I don't see any other questions. Of course, if there is any, you can funnel them directly, reach out to us at Helcim. You can also reach out to Anusha, and she can pass them over to us as well. But I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to our lovely host, Anusha, and her team to close out here. So thanks, everybody, and Anusha, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. And that does bring us to the end of today's session. On behalf of both the FinTech Calgary and Helcim team, we want to thank you all for joining us and engaging with your thoughtful questions. We hope we're leaving you with valuable insights and tools that you can all use and apply moving forward. Please stay connected with us for future events through our Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you would like to inquire further with Helcim's platform, you can fill out our post-event survey, which we will send out shortly and share with the Helcim's team. Thank you again, and we hope to see you all at our next event. Have a great night, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye.